All items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. We have two of our members are not with us this evening, and we'll excuse them during our council meeting. We have two items for discussion, and we'll start with the pavement management program, and Charles McDowell or Mark Flynn.
Good evening, Mayor Kavanaugh and members of council. As you all know, Public Works is responsible for the operation and maintenance of a large portion of the city's overall assets. Merging Public Works and Water Resources in December of 2008 combined those assets of water, wastewater, street, facilities, and fleet. Can't leave fleet out. All under one roof. The combined value of those assets is approaching $1 billion, significant investment in the infrastructure for the city of Goodyear. Maintaining those assets over the past several years had been relatively straightforward. Money was available for the upkeep, and most of the assets were very new, had just gone into service. They were in excellent condition, or they were still under warranty by the developer. So we had very little cash output in maintaining those assets. Now, however, declining revenues has a different story. Declining revenue and the increasing maintenance, now that these things have been in service over the years, are now in conflict. We are challenged now with making the available dollars go to the absolute best use across the overall city. We're close to 4 years into a static or a reduced maintenance program. Major maintenance or replacement of critical assets is looming, and we need to have a formalized method to identify and plan for that replacement or major maintenance items. So to that end, Public Works has been very aggressive in its review, assessment, and prioritization of city assets, and it's in the process of evaluating those assets across the city, across all the divisions, and planning how to best use the limited funding that we have at our disposal. Tonight's presentation will focus on the streets portion of the assets. We had done fleet a while back, as you'll recall, and we have plans in the future to do a similar presentation on the utilities so that we have an overall broad picture of the condition of the assets citywide. So tonight, Mark Flynn will walk you through this presentation. It's approximately a half hour long, and will be available for questions, comments, and discussions through it. And with that, if there's no questions, I will turn it over to Mark Flynn.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Streets is a relatively new area for me. It's only been since November of last year that I've been involved in streets and traffic maintenance here in the city. But I'm pleased to be able to present some information to you, perhaps give you a little bit of background, and maybe kind of a snapshot of where we are in the current condition. In order to manage the streets assets within the city of Goodyear, we utilize a tool called the Pavement Condition Index, the PCI. The PCI was developed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's widely used currently in both transportation and civil engineering. It's typically based on a visual survey of pavement. The street condition is determined by looking at the stresses that are occurring in the pavement, the raveling, cracking, rutting, patching work that occurs when infrastructure has to be repaired or replaced. And the PCI rating category can go from 0 to 100, 100 being a perfect piece of asphalt. New streets typically are going to start at about a 98 score, brand new roadways that are put into service. And we consider roadways to be failing when they reach a score of about 35 or less. The average PCI currently within the city of Goodyear, if we take all the street assets currently, is about a 75. This is also an industry standard that's used as a benchmark. When we're looking to identify current conditions and prioritize the conditions, we're taking feedback from a lot of different resources. We're getting feedback from citizens, general motorists who call with a complaint, or they've hit a pothole, or they've experienced something on a roadway. They call in, or they catch us through the city's website. We get emails, we get phone calls left on the answering service after hours. We're also getting questions raised to us by homeowners or by realtors who are trying to evaluate the area in response to questions that they're receiving from potential clients. You know, the idea that the poor aesthetics of a roadway has an impact upon the property values within an area is something that we take into consideration as well when we're looking to prioritize those areas. Public Works staff does an annual inspection of all the roadways in the city of Goodyear. Once annually, we visit every stretch of roadway in the city, and we're looking at updating the PCI data utilizing the GBA software system. That's the work order system, the work order management system that we use in the streets area. And then we plug in the information for work and service that we're doing, in addition to the visual observations that we see when we're out making those tours. And then there's also reactive maintenance and repair work. If damage were to occur as a result of a motor vehicle accident or as a result of weather damage, for example, you may recall the January storms last year where we had quite a bit of water in the Bullard Wash area at Yuma Road. We had some flooding that occurred, and as a result, we saw some substantial deterioration to the asphalt in that area because it became saturated and we got water into the subbase, which allowed the potholes to transmit through and some exacerbated deterioration that was occurring. All those pieces are factors that we're going to take into consideration when we're looking to evaluate the condition, the PCI of our roadways, and trying to prioritize where we need to be expending our dollars for repair. Roads requiring repair and maintenance are categorized into three primary categories: arterial roads, collectors, and residential streets. Arterials are what we would consider to be the main thoroughfares in Goodyear, places like Litchfield Road, McDowell Road. Wide roadways carrying high volumes of traffic and a lot of mixed traffic. You're going to see passenger cars and light trucks in those roadways, but you're also going to see heavy traffic, buses, delivery trucks, those kinds of things are occurring in those areas. Collectors are probably the next scale down. Roadways in the city such as Encanto, Palm Valley Boulevard, 144th or 173rd Avenue, those are the roadways that you're going to take from the arterials to get into the neighborhoods. A little bit smaller in scale and probably a little bit less in terms of the design profile that you'll see on that roadway. The final is the residential. Those are truly what we're driving across to get into our own driveways. Hillside, Columbus Street, those are neighborhoods that I actually happen to travel through on a regular basis to get home, and those are the types of roadways that are going to be about a couple of lanes wide, and in some cases are maintained by private HOAs, in addition to some that are the responsibility of the city. You know, we're also going to look at traffic volume and type. I mentioned the idea of buses or heavy trucks in terms of delivery and the number of trips per day. The retail corridor along Litchfield Road, for example, huge volumes of traffic, probably in excess of 20+ thousand trips per day occurring on those sections of roadways, and a wide variety of traffic types. So that's going to contribute to the deterioration of the roadway that you see because of the volume and the weight of the traffic that's traversing there. And then the final component is probably the least worrisome for us, but we take into consideration locations, schools, shopping centers, hospitals, because all those will have an impact upon traffic type and traffic volume. So when we start thinking about roadways and the PCIs, if you go back and you look at a historic component in the city of Goodyear, over the last 5 years, we have seen a very gentle, steady increase in the average PCI of roadways within the city. From 2006 at an average score of 62.3 to a current evaluation in 2010, last year's most recent evaluation, at 75.4. A very positive piece of news for the city overall because we're seeing that steady increase. But I want to look at the reasons behind that increase. When you think about how growth occurred in the city of Goodyear, it occurred in a tremendous spurt. There was a large volume of development that was occurring at a very short period of time. What we're seeing now is those developments that were occurring are now coming out of warranty. They're coming out of the responsibility of the developer and they're being transferred to the city. And what we're seeing is that the number of lane miles has increased dramatically. And because there are so many of those new roadways, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years old, that's contributing to that increase in the PCI average. I think that's a little bit of a false position for us to be considering. I'm excited that the number has been increasing, but I'm also worried about the reason and how that increase has been occurring. Lane miles versus our allocated budget. The left side of the chart that you see are the lane miles. And over that same 5-year period of time, 2006 to 2010, we've gone from about 360 lane miles to a little over 1,000 lane miles, a 300% jump in the number of lane miles. And when you look at a roadway like Litchfield, for example, where you might have 3 lanes of traffic in each direction, that would be, each lane would be considered 1 lane mile for a 1 mile length of traffic. So 3 lanes northbound, 3 lanes southbound for a 1 mile piece would be 6 lane miles. But a 300% increase over that 5-year period of time, while at the same time our allocated budget for maintenance on streets has decreased from about $1.5 million to about $800,000 in our 2010 allocation, also the number we have targeted for this year, fiscal year 2011. So about a 50% decrease in the allocated budget at the same time that we saw a 300% increase in the maintenance for that asset as a whole. When you look at the current asset value, one of the pieces that I do when I'm looking at the condition of buildings or streets and fleet from that component, I want to look at what the total value is. We're going to look at what that would be if we were to build every roadway in Goodyear new effective tomorrow, the new value of that roadway. We're going to factor out the deterioration value because all those roads are not built to an opening standard for tomorrow. And then we're going to add our maintenance expenditures over the life cycle of that roadway to determine the current inventory value. At present, in the city of Goodyear, we're estimating right now that that roadway asset, that 1,000 lane miles plus, is valued at a little over $300 million, $313 million. That's based on a current value, 2010 dollars, utilizing numbers of $55 per square yard for new streets, and a residual value at a failed point of about $20 per yard.
Does that include private roadways and HOAs?
Tremendous question. You know, I don't know that I can answer that question off the top of my head. Did we include that component? No. It does not. Only the ones that are the responsibility for the city of Goodyear. An excellent question. I apologize for not knowing that off the top of my head, but these are the components that the city is managing for the respect of the asset. So if we looked over that last 5-year period of time, that number of lane miles increased by a factor of 300%, 360 to a little over 1,000 lane miles. We're forecasting that for the next 5 years, we're not going to see that kind of growth. We look at the development that has occurred in Goodyear, and there are still a tremendous number of developments that have not yet been built out. The roadways are in place, the streets are in place, the infrastructure to support curb, gutter, sidewalk, those types of things exist, but the properties themselves are not built out. The homes have not been constructed. There are still commercial developments where that can occur as well. So we're projecting that the lane miles for the next 5 years will not increase to any great extent. So if we were to forecast at 2014, we think we'll still be looking in the neighborhood of 1,060 lane miles of traffic. However, over that same period of time, if we don't make a change to the way we're applying maintenance dollars and tackling maintenance in the city on those roadways, we're projecting that the PCI rating of those roadways will decrease because we're seeing the asset begin to deteriorate because of the time in the sun, the type of traffic that's occurring, our inability to keep up with the things that are necessary on those roadways to try to help extend their life cycle.
So where on this chart would visually a citizen driving down the street start to complain about the way the street looks? At a 69 level or a 66?
Well, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go into a photo representation here at the end. I think that number is going to be different for a lot of different folks for a lot of different reasons. The 75, I'm actually going to take you through new roadway construction right down to some of the worst roadways that we'll see in the city, and hopefully I can reference you to some roadways that you all travel on a regular basis to help you with that frame of mind.
Mark,
Yes.
sort of on a follow-up on that question. You mentioned that under 35 is failing, PCI.
From our perspective, yes, sir.
What is the number that would be comparable to not failing, but about the PCI where you would actually go in and do an overlay, because without it, it would start to deteriorate and becomes a cost benefit. If you go past that number, it becomes more expensive from a repair standpoint. Any idea when that PCI number would be?
I do, as a matter of fact, sir, and you're kind of tossing up that softball for me just to hit out of the park because we're actually jumping right into that component.
Okay, I didn't realize. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. You haven't seen this in advance, but there is a point where the value of the roadway and the condition of the maintenance or the level of maintenance necessary begin to cross each other, where we're seeing some diminishing returns. And depending on what we want to establish as the average for the city of Goodyear, that number is going to vary slightly. That 75 industry standard that is currently used in municipalities and civil engineering across the country, I think is a very strong target for us to consider, but it has some implications in doing so, so we'll jump into that component here next. Okay. When we look at that deterioration from a 75.4 to a 63.3 over the next 5-year life cycle, the value of the asset also will decrease. So we began to forecast what those numbers might look like, and that 12-point drop corresponds at its current value to about a $50 million drop in the value of the asset. If we were to forecast out to 2014, utilizing current value of dollars today, we're projecting that our PCI value, our roadway asset value would be about $263 million versus the $313 million it's valued at today. The lower that number continues to drop, the more maintenance or rehabilitation that's necessary in order to return them to a standard in that 75 range. So when we prioritize maintenance, the idea, Councilman Pizzillo, your idea about the chip seal and the mill and overlay, that's the middle category that I'm showing on this slide. 3 basic levels of maintenance that we can perform on streets and roadways. The first type is preventive activity. That's the type of thing where we're going to do crack sealing. We're going to do some preservation sealing, perhaps a fog seal where we're putting more petroleum-based product into the roadway to help invigorate its life and extend its life cycle a little bit. We want to keep the water from getting down into the subbase and causing that deterioration. The second level that we're looking at here is corrective. The chip seal, the mill and overlay work that you're seeing. That type of thing is going to occur as roadways begin to deteriorate and we're seeing failure into cracks that are allowing that water to get into place and the subbase beginning to fall apart. And then finally, and unfortunately the most expensive, is rehabilitative road work. This is going to be partial or full reconstruction. And as we drop from number 1 to number 3 in terms of the maintenance type, so increases the cost per square yard for that work to occur. So when we're looking at the work that's occurring, a mill and overlay component, we'll show some photographs to help you correlate to understand where that piece would occur. But numbers that are going to be down into the 40s and 50s are where we're going to start to see those types of things occurring. In some cases, some of those numbers we may have allowed to have gotten a little bit too far, but in some cases we think there's some salvation that can occur to that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. In the past, we've not recapped, but put oil on our roads.
Done a fog seal or a slurry seal. Yes, sir.
Right. Now, and we were told that would improve the upkeep of our roads for a period of, I believe, 10 years. What happened?
I'm not sure I would concur with the idea that a fog seal or a slurry seal would extend the life cycle of a roadway for a period of 10 years. I do think it's a contributing factor in order to extend the life cycle of a roadway. But I think that there's an evolutionary component of maintenance that has to occur in a roadway for us to get to a 25 or a 30-year life of a roadway. The factors in defining the condition, the base, the design mix that was utilized in the roadway are a factor in how that would occur, and then what the periodic maintenances that you do to that roadway are over the life cycle of the roadway. In my opinion, a fog seal or a slurry seal is probably going to buy you in the neighborhood of probably 4 to 6 years. In some cases, maybe a little less. In some cases, a little bit more, depending upon the condition of the roadway when we started.
Well, how has the application affected your thinking of what you're proposing to us today?
The application of those types of treatments?
Yeah.
I think they're a vital component of our maintenance program, and I'll get into what I'm going to forecast as a suggested maintenance plan that we'd like to utilize on behalf of the city. I think that a fog seal and a slurry seal are major factors, low dollar expenditures, down in the 25, 35, 50 cent per square yard range. Those are the pieces that will really help us extend to a 20 and a 25-year life, because they'll forestall the need to do the chip seal or the mill and overlay, and then certainly extend the life before we have to come into a full-scale or a partial-scale rehabilitation, reconstruction of the roadway. All those pieces, in my mind, are the factors that will make up the enhanced life cycle of that roadway. We'll jump to that in just a moment.
Would you consider slurring in the future on our roads?
Very much so. Yes, sir. That's a recommended component of how we envision the long-term maintenance plan for the roadways. Now, there are some roadways in Goodyear that I'll tell you right now, they're beyond that point. I could slurry them tomorrow, but there's so much deterioration that it's not going to help to the extent that I would expect.
I can't recall how many miles we did in that project over the past.
I'd have to go back and look at that history. I don't know that number either.
Okay,
But we'll talk about that, the idea of what that maintenance program should look like.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. When you're managing maintenance, if we're not doing maintenance on the roadway, we're looking at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10-year life cycle. If we're not doing anything to those roadways, the life cycle would look like we start out at a 98 with a new piece of roadway, a new section of street that's been accepted by the city and come out of the warranty. If we don't do anything to the roadway, we're expecting that at 10, 12 years, 15 years, that road is going to be to the point where it needs to be rebuilt. So if we were looking at this as kind of a model, you'd be rebuilding a roadway 30 times, essentially, over a 30-year life cycle. Three times over a 30-year life cycle for that roadway. From a cost-effective standpoint, that just isn't, there's no way that's cost-effective. We're going to look at the PCI and the structural analysis of the roadway. One of the things that we've been doing now for about the last 3 or 4, maybe 5 months, is we've been taking cores of roadways. We're actually looking, by drawing core samples out of a roadway, to begin to look at what its underlying condition is. What is the condition of the roadway? What's the substructure look like? And how is this impacting what the life cycle of the roadway is? In some cases, we're finding things that make us very, very worried. In some of the cases, we've annexed county roads where essentially we have a chip seal over perhaps an existing a native soil component. In other cases, some of those arterials, Litchfield, places like McDowell, there's a substantial base and then 2 or 3 or more layers of asphalt in building the roadway. So that's an important component for us. But the technical analysis has become vital in us building a comprehensive picture of what those roadways in Goodyear do look like. And we're doing this now in residential neighborhoods, in collectors, and in arterials. We're
Mark,
trying to use that
I
as
have
a
a
piece to
question.
help us with that valued
And
asset.
I don't know the technical term for it, but I remember we had a big discussion on rubberized roads, made of.
Rubberized asphalt, yeah.
Yes. Whatever happened with that?
We actually have rubberized asphalt in our standard. It's typically used when you're approaching neighborhoods. It helps to quiet the noise of traffic
Still
that you
doing
experience
that.
in there.
Okay.
It's a valued component of the overall maintenance program, used predominantly where you're going to have high-speed traffic or in the area where you're going to have some type of an activity where you want to keep that noise down. It's also a very expensive product, so we don't want to use it everywhere, and we don't want to use it on
What's
roadways.
the longevity with that compared to the other surface? What's the longevity of that compared to other surfaces?
Rubberized asphalt does have a longer life cycle because it has the ability to help shed the water from that.
A significant amount?
I think it's going to depend on the application in which it's placed and how that traffic is occurring. But rubberized asphalt, as a general rule, is where the industry continues to move when it's applicable to the type of situation it's being put in. I believe the standards, the design standards and the development standards in Goodyear are a great contributing factor to how we apply rubberized asphalt. It's not the end-all catch-all. I wouldn't recommend that you put it everywhere where you're developing or you're rehabilitating roadways because it's cost prohibitive to do that. But in those applications where you're near a neighborhood or an area where you have high-speed traffic and you want to cut down the noise, certainly a valued component of your program overall.
Mark, real quick question. When you showed the core, it just brought a question to mind. As a policy, when we annex roads or it's on the agenda for annex, do you take a core sample ahead of time to see what kind of condition that road is in or maybe costs we may have down the road if we annex that particular road?
Sir, we've not done that in every instance. Matter of fact, the coring machine that it was used to take these samples, it's probably only been with us now, the piece of equipment we purchased earlier in the summer of 2010. So it's only been, say, the last 5 or 6 months that we've been able to do that. We don't have that data in all the situations where roadways have been annexed in, say, the last several years, at least certainly not in the year that I've been involved in the streets and traffic side of the house. I do know that we're beginning to take those samples, though, now across the city as a whole. We've actually broken the city map down into categories, and we're looking at them as sections of roadway that we categorize, evaluate the PCI, and then we're trying to take these core samples to help correlate our opinion of what we see in the roadway. How is the roadway, if we're looking at a roadway that's beginning to fail, we want to know what the core structure looks like so we can begin to see how that would have impacted what the life cycle of that roadway is. It's been a huge evaluative benefit for us as a tool looking forward on behalf of the entire city. But as you can imagine, getting out to all those sections is taking a little bit of time to make our way around the city.
No, I can appreciate that. My only suggestion is maybe consider in the future if anybody's proposing that we annex any roadway, if you have the equipment now, is to do the core sample, see if it's up to our standards before we take it.
I would agree with that 100%. A great example where that's occurring is we've been in negotiations with the city of Avondale about trading some roadways because of some jurisdictional boundaries. And one of the things we did when we began looking at what the suggested opportunities for transfer might be, we've taken core samples. Matter of fact, some of the cores in this box represent those sections of roadway that are helping us to determine whether it's a good move on the part of the city to do that. So it's an excellent suggestion and one we certainly want to apply. Back to the idea of the pavement management system. The PCI is a great guide for us. It's a great tool. But that structural analysis, the core that you see, we also do that visual inspection that I mentioned to help determine that, to try to assess what those needs are. What does the road look like? And then what we want to do is to look at those 3 categories of maintenance, type 1 through type 3, and determine what's the right solution for that roadway. What can I do and what will it cost to do that in order to make sure that I'm getting the best bang for the buck, so to speak, about how we're expending that maintenance dollar. So we want to go from that life cycle of a 10-year replacement, We want to go to something where we're applying a fog seal or a couple of fog seals and maybe a slurry before we get to the point of having to do an overlay, and then maybe some additional fog work in order to keep the average of that average PCI of that section of roadway at the higher end of that scale. You know, if we look at a roadway with a 98 score to start, if we can get in the fifth or the sixth year or the fourth year, depending on what's happening in the roadway, and apply a fog seal, we can extend the life of that roadway, because before we get to the point, perhaps once or twice, before we get to the point of having to come in and do major crack sealing or a major overlay. And we're doing that at less than $1 per square yard, down in the 25, 35, 40 cent per square yard range. When we get up into the preventative chip seals and the overlays, we're moving up into the 8 and 10 and 12 and $15 per square yard range, depending upon what the thickness of those roadways are. So obviously, our desire is to move our maintenance needs towards the lower end of that maintenance spectrum. The more money I can spend at the type 1 level allows us to make that bang for the buck go a little bit further, while at the same time assuring that we're looking at that maximum life cycle. And 75 right now is the number that we're using as the target, but that will have some implications for us. So if we're looking at a life cycle of maintenance, this type of activity is what we're recommending for the long run, because it's the greatest way, in our opinion, to extend the life of the asset and the value of the asset. $1 on preservation spent in the first several years of the life cycle of the roadway saves us spending big dollars later, $7, $8, $10+ down the line. Putting off maintenance, if we chose not to do this, what's the implication for the city? You know, at present, we're looking at a deferred maintenance backlog today of that $313 million asset. We're estimating in excess of a $30 million maintenance backlog, a deferred maintenance value for the roadways, the asset in the city right now. If we were to choose to postpone and not make any changes to how we're applying maintenance, by 2014, we're projecting that deferred maintenance backlog will increase to $76 million, a more than 100% jump. And by 2018, 7, 8 years down the line, we think it'll be well in excess of $180 million. It's an exponentially increasing component that requires some attention at the short term in order to be able to offset long-term degradation. So I mentioned our desire is to tackle maintenance at the lower ends of the spectrum. That $30 million maintenance backlog right now for our fiscal 2011 forecast falls into those three types of categories. Right now we're projecting that it's about $5.2 million in deferred maintenance need that would occur at the Type 1 level, $12.7 million at the Type 2 level, and $12.4 million at the Type 3 level. Those are huge numbers, and I'm not naive enough to think that someone's going to write me a check for $30 million and tell me to go fix it tomorrow. But it's important that we begin looking at this because it gives us a benchmark. It gives us a way to evaluate what's our current condition and how is that condition changing as we continue to age the life of the asset. The budget required to restore, to make us whole from that $30 million backlog, if we were to receive an allocation in the $4 million mark, we're looking at about a 7.5-year term in order for us to get back to the point where we're whole, to eliminate that maintenance backlog. If that number decreases by $1 million, if we were to drop that number to $3 million, the life to recover, the time period to recover, extends to 10.1 years. It's a 2.5-year increase with that change in dollars. Our current maintenance budget for fiscal 2011 right now stands at $800,000. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that I don't think I would be able to recover if that number stays at that funding level for an extended period of time. So we mentioned a little bit ago, what do those roadways look like, and what is a resident driving down the roadway going to think and feel and experience when they're driving on that roadway? So when we think about the average PCI in the city being at 75, a lot of roads are going to be higher than that, a lot of roads are going to be lower than that in order for us to come up with a 75-point average. So when we think about roads that are in the 80 to 100-point range, we're thinking about places like Canyon Trails West. About 4 or 5 years old in its construction, one fog seal has been applied to this roadway. Very good, consistent application of the asphalt, no real cracking, raveling, no rutting that you're seeing. No infrastructure work has been upgraded in the area, so we don't see those cuts and patches that are occurring. A great roadway here in the city. Dropping down, we're going to focus more at the lower values to give you some perspective, but in the 60 to 80 PCI range, we're looking at places like Wigwam north of Indian School, from the kind of the southwest corner of Millennium High School, off in that area. The double line you see coming across the center of the roadway, I'll kind of use the pointer here in order to be able to show you that. This is a water line that was installed in the roadway. Matter of fact, there's the water valve that you see right there and the sealing that was done around it. This is a component where there's a tremendous amount of crack sealing that's been done in order to deal with both transverse cracking in the roadway as well as longitudinal cracking. You can see these, the veins of the road, if you would, for lack of a better word. We're also beginning to see new cracks forming out of existing cracks that have already been repaired. This is where I become a little bit more concerned. This is also a roadway that we see some raveling, and it's hard to tell in the photograph, and I apologize, but we're beginning to see the fine materials, the fine pieces of asphalt and the silts and the like. They're coming out of the roadway because as the roadway ages and dries out, those are the pieces that kind of literally dry up and blow away. So when we're seeing these travel lanes, you're going to get a little bit of a rougher texture to the roadway. You're going to be able to feel some of these patches that have been done when you're driving down the roadway. You might feel those as slight bumps when you're driving. The infrastructure work is a necessity. The city's going to continue to develop. We have to be able to put those in place. But assuring that we're doing this maintenance work and repair work to minimize the ability of water to get into that substructure is critical. Another section of Wigwam north of Indian School, again, letting you come back. You can see here the transverse cracking. Oops, need to get this back. The transverse cracking is occurring across the lanes, as well as the longitudinal cracking that you're seeing down the lanes between the layers of asphalt. The worries that I have when you're looking at these transverse cracks are that this is leading me to believe that there's some beginning to see failure in the subgrade. We're seeing those roads begin to stretch apart, and those cracks will begin to become a little bit wider. Matter of fact, I think we'll depict that here in the next photograph. Indian School west of Bullard, again, significant amounts of cracking with a PCI of 65. But as you begin to look at this transverse crack, this is literally as much as 1.5 inches to 2 inches wide at varying points and as much as 1.5 inches deep. So we're getting water that's ponding in there. This has actually been crack sealed in the last 3 or 4 years, to my knowledge. But we're seeing water pond in this when we have some excessive rains, and we're also beginning to see the start of some small-scale cracking that's occurring along some of those existing lines. So definitely a component where we need to come back and do a little bit more follow-up with regard to crack sealing. Getting a little bit worse as we take the tour to Goodyear, so to speak. Estrella Parkway from Vineyard to Stargazer, a PCI of 52. And what we're looking at here are, again, transverse and longitudinal cracks. You can see them running up the roadway. But there's also a significant amount of raveling that's occurring, a little bit more textured view to the asphalt in this piece, a little bit rougher surface. If we were actually to get down and look at that very, very closely, what you'd see is there's some voids in that asphalt. And again, that's leading us to believe that we're seeing those fines dry up and leave the condition of the roadway. 145th Avenue, just west of Anita. Most of you probably came in on that roadway here right off of Van Buren. This is a contrast slide that I wanted to show you. A very poor PCI, 45 points on the overall scale. And this is a roadway that's only about 5 years old in terms of when it was constructed. While no cracking, no patches have been done to this roadway, raveling, this is probably the worst case of raveling that I've experienced yet in my time here in the city. It's a very rough surface. The fines are completely gone, very rough texture when you drive on it, and you actually hear that coming through your tires. This is an area where, while not residential, this is where the rubberized asphalt would help change that, but because it's non-residential, it wouldn't be necessarily a standard for what we're looking at. Litchfield Road, Indian School to Wigwam in the southbound lanes. Again, cracking upon cracking, we've repaired. Some patching that was done, some crack seal work that was done, and now we're seeing those cracks continue, which again, in my mind, leads me to believe that there's some failure or beginnings of failure in the subgrade. We're seeing water get into those components. Potholing, been patched at least once or twice, you can tell from the area around the area that you're seeing right here, and then crack sealing work that's been done to help try to keep that moisture out of the subgrades. And then as we get to the worst part of the area, Saraville, Lower Buckeye to Elwood, a PCI score of 29, truly a roadway that needs to be removed and replaced. And this is an example, Councilman Pizzolo, of some of those annexed roadways. These are components that were taken over from the county through an annexation process, but in some cases, they're literally chip seal on native soil. When they were county roads, when they were farm roads, they were probably more than adequate for what they were being asked to do. But now as we see development, residential development, commercial development occurring in the area, we're seeing a huge increase in the volume of traffic. We're seeing a huge increase in the weight of that traffic, putting a lot more stress on those roadways as a whole. Indian School 303 to Saraville. This was a particularly noteworthy slide for me because it kind of has all the pieces that I worry about from a pavement strategy. I've got raveling, I've got cracking, I've got repair work, I've got roads that have expanded based upon what their use is. And this is actually, if we were coming from 303 heading east towards Saraville, it's a 2-lane road at that point. And as you get close to Saraville and kind of the north end of Pebble Creek and you're coming into the Palm Valley area, the road widens. Those improvements were done as part of the development process, and we changed from a roadway that's a PCI score of 23 to something that's probably much more closer to that 75 average on behalf of the city as a whole. But this is a section of roadway that has huge volumes of traffic. Residential folks traveling out of their neighborhoods to get to the 303 south to I-10, north to pick up other areas of the Northwest Valley. A huge volume of traffic traveling down this roadway every day, and a very poor roadway from our overall evaluation. Lower Buckeye Road south of MC85. There's a little section that MC85 tees into, or excuse me, Lower Buckeye tees into MC85. Truly an industrial area, an area where there isn't a lot of residential traffic, probably not a lot of residents in the city who are traveling in this area, but a huge volume of commercial traffic. What you're seeing here is essentially roadway failure. I mean, we're looking at alligator cracking as prolific as anything we see in the city. There are some longitudinal cracking that you can see running down the travel lanes, but it's also very high heavy traffic. The types of vehicles that are down here are going to be tractor trailers, delivery trucks, commercial trucks coming in and out of those industrial areas. Probably not the highest priority for us in terms of repair, but certainly something we need to keep into consideration as we're thinking about what the long-term condition and that average PCI is for the city as a whole. So in summary, with a $310+ million asset in the streets and pavement asset for the city, our annual maintenance needs currently exceed our available funding. We're not able to keep up with what we're doing currently. Deferred maintenance total continues to increase, and I'm forecasting now that it will continue to increase for the next foreseeable future. The trend is that we're able to do only minimum maintenance with the dollars that we're receiving currently. There'll be no significant restoration or rebuilds. The idea of partial and full reconstruction at an $800,000 budget level, you'd be talking about doing a quarter-mile section of roadway in order to exhaust that expenditure very, very quickly. And our focus right now, as I mentioned, is to try to look at the type 1, 2, and 3 components where we can try to spread that dollar across the city and extend the life of the assets that we know we can actually have some salvation upon. And then our PCI will continue to decline at the current maintenance levels. So at some point, there's going to have to be some consideration of, is the 75 PCI number, the average for the city that we stand at currently, is that the acceptable target, or do we want to look at modifying that? Should we look at a lower standard and then try to apply dollars accordingly in order to do that? And that's obviously a decision for another day. The purpose of this presentation today is simply informational and educational, but I definitely wanted to assure that you had an understanding of what we're looking at in terms of the long-term future of the pavement asset as a whole. With that, I'll be happy to field any questions that you have and defer to my colleagues as appropriate. And
Questions?
Yeah, real quick. When I was looking at the fourth quarter, we still had some extra money, I guess, that wasn't spent in the highway side. Was that for road projects, or was that specifically on the maintenance side?
You're referring to HERF dollars?
Yes.
At the close of the fourth quarter from fiscal year 2010, we were expending the dollars focused at HERF as a precaution against what was occurring on Yuma Road from Litchfield to Goodyear Boulevard East. There was a component in that ARRA grant where if those numbers exceeded the value of the contract, the city's traffic department, the Streets and Traffic Group, was going to make up that difference. So the dollars that we were expending at that point in time were being held in order to prepare and protect that project, while at the same time tackle what maintenance we could in order to be able to kind of bring both to advance both concurrently. We did end because we were too late to be able to start some projects toward the end of the year. They couldn't be expended before the end of the year, so we weren't able to expend all of that HERF allocation. In order to offset that coming into fiscal 11, we've actually outlined a series of projects to actually tackle the entire budget. We have no grants for roadways this year, so all that money would be expended on maintenance and repair efforts right now to the tune of about $800,000.
I do have one question. So in the future, when you come back to us and kind of give us an outline of what the worst roads may be, I mean, obviously you showed some identified ones. I think even 6 to 9 months ago, I was complaining about Estrella Road. And I guess to me, priority-wise would be obvious safety,
Right.
most traveled. And, well, I guess those top two, safety and most traveled. And then I do understand some of those ones that are in the industrial areas where you would have weight to the trucks that would cause even worse problems. So would we be seeing that, say, within the next, how long, 4 months?
You know, actually, we're finalizing the plan currently for where we need to go, so as we move into the second half of the fiscal year, we're able to begin those projects as we're kind of seeing the timing coming into spring and we get out of the rainy season and the like. That's when we want to kick off those maintenance projects. So I can certainly bring that information back to you and tell you what our forecast and our recommended plan is. The idea of looking at, like in some of those industrial areas, we're going to make sure that we're patching holes and we don't have a safety function, a safety concern as a result of deterioration that's occurring there. But we certainly want to apply those dollars in the area where they will receive the kind of that most bang for the buck kind of thing. Heavily traveled roadways, we put a significant focus on the areas in and around schools and the way folks are traveling to those areas. The idea of the reflective pavement markings and painting in those areas to make sure that we're trying to make sure that those alleyways and travelways, the way students travel and the way parents travel to get those children to those locations is in its best condition possible. Right now, it's a balancing act, to be perfectly honest with you. I have a $30 million need, and I have less than $1 million to throw at it. So there are some pieces that we're falling short on, but we're certainly trying to continually prioritize and tackle the ones that we think have the greatest implication for the city.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, thank you. In the coming years, what do you think each annual budget would need to meet the program that we're talking about?
If I were to forecast to take that 75 PCI number now, and if that remains the target, I'd like to target the maintenance dollars for streets and traffic in the neighborhood of about $2.5 million annually. If we're going to try to decrease the backlog of deferred maintenance, that $30 million number that I spoke of, that number would need to increase in excess of that in order for us to begin to whittle that number down. And part of that will be a tolerance question on the part of council to say how quickly, if we want to dwindle that, how quickly do we want that to occur, and then the funding would be correlated to achieve that goal in terms of that timeline. But if I were to forecast on an ongoing basis, if I had the chance to start the process anew, I'd be looking at a number somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2.5 million annually.
Well, if you don't do it now and do it piecemeal and take care of it, you're going to pay in the long run. So.
Those old Amco transmission commercials ring in my head. You know, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. But I truly want to come to you with the idea that says we're trying to apply some very evaluative thought to this. We want to analyze. We want to look at where our biggest needs are and identify those pieces to the best interest of the city as a whole.
You know, it's really interesting because when we first moved to the area and we were staying with some friends and we were visiting some other locations to settle in, Ron and I walked some of the streets and you really saw the difference. And it influenced us a great deal as to where we were going to purchase a home because it just says, does the city really care about their city, about keeping their roads up? So it has that other element to it when people are driving down the streets.
I appreciate that comment greatly because while I think that's a bigger community issue in terms of being able to maintain the value of homes and you know personal assets within the community, but I think this is a contributing factor to that. You know, for me as a maintenance manager, this is kind of what I've done throughout the majority of my career. I'm looking at components where the principles are applying to the different type of asset. You know, whether it's fleet, whether it's buildings, facilities, whether it's in this case streets and traffic, the principles are the same, or we're trying to apply some of those same good scientific evaluation standards to say how can we best get the bang for our buck and still be able to hold our heads up in the city to say we think we're doing a good job with what we're being provided, and this is a good standard for us to set as a baseline. If that number, that baseline becomes our average standard, some will be worse, some will be better. But certainly there's an overall target that we're shooting for in the city.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Harvey?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I think we have a PowerPoint coming up. Paul Louisi and I have been tasked with giving you just a brief update on the development review process that staff has recently embarked on over the last several months. And the primary mission of this is to go over the evaluation of the development review processes and talk about some of the process improvements that we've recently implemented, those that are in will be implemented in the future or are in the process of being implemented. I'll just give you a very brief overview of the development review process. And in a nutshell, that's our development review process. It begins with a general plan and ends up with a certificate of occupancy. The first three of those steps, the mayor and council are very familiar with and see those frequently. The remaining steps are administrative, and within each of those steps, there's numerous ordinances and regulations and codes that deal with that. And this can be very daunting to a novice or even a developer, because all of the processes are different from city to city, even within the valley. So we were tasked with making our processes a little more simpler, user-friendly, and improve overall customer relations. Management convened a couple of months ago, convened a workshop with representatives of various departments: economic development, community development, fire, building safety, life department, as well as engineering and public works. And the purpose in the workshop was to review the processes, identify process improvements that would improve overall customer service, also to improve the overall internal knowledge of of the development processes. There's not any one person in the city that understands every process and is the expert on every process. I'm going to go over, we identified basically 4 areas of concern that we focused on, and those are the first 4 up there: the pre-application meeting process, development policy committee review process, a certificate of occupancy process for change of occupant, and then tenant improvement process. I'm going to go over the first 2, and then Paul Louisi will go over the next 2. We also identified a couple of other topics for future discussion, but we didn't focus on that, and that's not the primary focus of tonight's presentation. Just the staffing, obviously there's been a staff reduction in community development as well as fire, building safety, life department. The staff is now 10 in community development. We were reduced by 1 planning manager, 4 planners, and 1 planning technician. And there's the current staffing within the department. The records analyst serves all 3 departments that are associated with development services, engineering, building safety, as well as community development. The pre-application meeting process improvements. Several years ago, many years ago, we started pre-application meetings with developers, and it's a very common thing within the valley, throughout the United States, and it gives an applicant an opportunity to meet with various departments that are involved in the development process: building safety, planning, engineering, public works, whoever, to talk about their project and for us to give them some feedback as to the issues that might come up through the development process. And this saves them time and money and their energy before they submit something to the city. It also educates the staff and gives us a better understanding of what they're proposing. So when the plans come in, they're not foreign, and we have a better understanding. So it has benefits on both sides. Several cities actually require pre-application meetings. We do require pre-application meetings on our design review process, but we don't require it on others. We encourage it, but we don't require it. So some of the improvements we want to make within this pre-application process we've been doing for several years is first understand who from each department should be at the meeting and reconfirm and make sure we have the right people at the meeting. Restructure the agenda, and so people who need to be there understand that, and optional attendees are aware of that. We definitely need to encourage more pre-application meetings. Use this tool. It's on Thursday afternoons. Every Thursday afternoon, people can call and ask for pre-application meetings instead of someone calling and meeting individually with each department or shopping for answers. It's better for them to get all the answers in one meeting. We need to improve in meeting documentation, make sure we have a standard agenda format, and also publish summary minutes after the meeting so everybody walks away from the meeting and has the same understanding of what they heard, because sometimes that has been a problem. We'll also place the project information on the website so people can access that and get information about the project easier. Develop an informational brochure regarding the pre-application meeting process and explain its purpose and operation. So those are the focus of the first area of process improvement. The next one is called a development policy committee process improvements, and this was something that began several years ago too. It's codified in our zoning ordinance, and we need to make some improvements to this. This is the internal process. Once an applicant has made a submittal on a zoning case or a special use application to the city, it's routed to various departments. The comments are sent back to community development, and they compile the comments, and then we have meetings on Wednesday morning with key representatives from various departments, and we discuss the comments, and we reconcile any differences, resolve any issues, and we have one set of comments that go out to the applicant. That's the purpose in the Development Policy Committee. We need to, once again, reconfirm who should attend these meetings. We should group similar agenda items together so we don't waste staff time. If their water and sewer need to be there, then we need to have all those agenda items at the beginning of the meeting and group those in a logical sequence. We also suggested that each month we have economic development come in and give us an overview of new projects and brief us on that, so we're aware of that. So everybody has the same bit of knowledge and when a new project comes through the door. Also expand electronic documents to minimize paper copies submitted and expedite distribution to departments. We're working towards more electronic submittal rather than paper copies. We can get information out quicker. And once again, place the project information on the web, so in a common place, so people, some staff members can access it. Once again, develop informational brochures to explain the review process. Make applicants as well as the public have a better understanding of the process. We did some benchmarking against some other valley cities in two areas. This is just, we're talking about planning cases now. Building safety will talk about tenant improvements and building permits. On first review, our published cycle time is 20 days, and for second review, it is 15 days. The range within the valley for first review is 15 to 30 days. The range within second reviews are 10 to 15 days. That's the data city by city, and then at the bottom you'll see how many days we're below or above the average published cycle times with all those cities.
Harvey, do we know why Gilbert is such an exception? When I was looking over this the other day, I was amazed at 45. No one's even close to 45.
Right? No, I don't know why Gilbert's that way.
Do we believe? Is it true? I mean,
this is the information that we garnered from them on through their brochures and through their web, but whether they're meeting that goal, I don't know or not, or they're better than
hopefully
that.
they're meeting it.
We've also made several other process improvements I'd like to tell you about. A couple of things we've done is we used to have the applicant submit a list of the adjacent property owners for mailing lists and labels. We get that, we garner that electronically now from the post office. We've eliminated that step. We use postcards to notify people instead of letters. And in the postcard, we tell them where they can find the development application. So they can go to the website and find the development application instead of just sending them a summary of the application. Actually go on the website and get more information. So that seems to work better.
And how long has that been in process? When did you start that?
Do you know how long? About a year?
So-
Six
so
to 8
this-
months,
this
yeah.
fest- Okay.
We are revising our design guidelines. We're a little bit, probably more than halfway through. We've got design guidelines that are general in nature. They were adopted in 1999. They were meant that way because we wanted to make the design process negotiated process, what we like and don't like in terms of design. We have shoulds and shalls and should nots, and we encourage things. So the problem was the document lends itself to a lot of interpretation. So there's been some confusion with developers as to what our expectations are, the staff's expectations. So we want to better articulate and clarify what our expectations are in that design, in that document. So if we really, really want to require it, we need to tell them, yes, this is a shall. It's not a, we'd really like to see you do it, that kind of thing. So they have a better understanding of what we expect. We've also, for several, I think it's been over a year, that engineering has been using project docs. I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm sure you're familiar with that. You had a presentation on the electronic submission of civil engineering plans, and comments are sent back to the applicant electronically. We're going to adapt that system and that software to planning so we can have submittal of electronic documents to us for review and send back comments back to the applicant electronically. We think that that's the way to go, and it'll improve the time sequence in terms of getting comments back and forth. We also do quarterly developer forum meetings. We had one last week. We opened that up for developers and builders and others interested in the development process. We have a distribution list, and it's free that people can join. So if there's a proposed change in our zoning ordinance or engineering guidelines or building safety has a change in policy, we post that on the website, and then we send notices out to anyone who's on that list so they can know about that change, they can comment on that change, they know when the meeting's coming up. And that's been, and people really do appreciate that, and I think that's worked very well. We also send out a customer service survey after our contact at the front counter, and we get back response normally that generally are good and this fosters the communication between the city and the development community. That concludes my comments, and then I think Paul is on deck next, unless you have questions specifically for me, or we'll be both available to answer any questions.
I had one question. Within your, I know you were saying that in the future you're hoping to have a one-person customer service type of liaison, I guess, that maybe they would go to. In the meantime, when you're having these these pre-application meetings, within the meeting documentation, can you are you or can you put together some kind of, say, flow chart for that specific developer customer that says, if you need to speak to someone in water, here's your contact. If you need to speak to someone in streets, here's your contact. So they know specifically who they can go to from the very beginning, rather than having to contact 3 different people to find out who their person is they should speak to. See what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes. Yes, we can clarify that better. In terms of through the planning process, we usually focus on the planner that we assign to the project, and they call that person, and that person can get the answers for them. That's ideally what can happen, but as you get into more of the construction and there are lots of details, and there could be different people that are involved in it. We can make every effort to do that.
Well, and I respect the fact that you would like them to go to that single person, but unfortunately, in the last 9 years, I've been seeing this roller coaster effect of our customers being happy. And so that was one of the things in recent history that I've been hearing, is that I can't find a straight answer of who to go to. And so that's why I'm suggesting this until we have maybe a better grasp. And I know you guys, it's the staff. You don't have enough staff to go around. And so that may be the help, is that they at least see who that person would be.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Harvey, what is your timeline for all these changes? I mean, you have a goal, because not all of them are set at this time. That was my understanding. I was reading over.
Councilmember Lord, or I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Lord.
Doesn't matter.
We do have timeline for different process. For instance, the design guidelines, we hope to take that to the mayor and council the first quarter of next year.
And on the guidelines, the other question was, while you mentioned that, are there going to be any changes in guidelines on materials? Or you and I often have this discussion on, and so will there be anything in that nature, or is this just pretty standard?
Well, there'll be there will be some major changes in terms of
Okay.
what we've been doing lately. I guess basically we're just going to codify what we've been trying to articulate to the development community on materials and colors and standards. And when they're required, we're going to make sure that it's very clear in our document that it is required. I think that's our intent.
Okay. It's a very ambitious plan, and unfortunately, we haven't given you a lot of staff to make all this happen, so we appreciate all the work that your department does. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Real quick, Harvey, with the proposed changes that are coming through, have you vetted any of that among your customers or stakeholders, the outside, to see if their interpretation, I guess, as you come across with your final process, is the results that you're expecting, to make sure their interpretation of the process and what you think, their understanding of it?
Councilmember Priscilla, not yet. For instance, like in the design guidelines, we would put that out to the development community for comment after we get a draft. Yes, we will be doing that.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
Harvey, just a couple of questions. I'm assuming that separate developer world, which you're very familiar with and have been for many years, from the small business, the maintenance fellow, the TI guy. In the development world, the workload is dramatically down over the last couple of years. Is it also down in TIs and that sort of thing in small business? And if so, by what degree would you say?
Well, that area is going to be addressed by Paul Louisi. He's going to talk specifically about tenant improvements, TIs. We're seeing, obviously, we've seen a lot of vacant commercial space being absorbed by new occupants, and so a lot of, I think, building safety's activity has been in the TI realm, and I think Paul will have some more details on that, more so than new construction. Excuse me.
You know, when you talk about the complaints, I get it. It's in that realm largely. It's the small guy trying to make a living as a maintenance guy, doing TIs for people. And in one of your charts, you had that you have a forum every quarter for developers. Does this include a formal input from those people out there who do the TIs and that sort of thing, so this process reflects their concerns?
We solicit, Mayor, comments from builders, developers, and they're on the list to attend these.
I'm talking about the small guy, the guy who does the maintenance, the small changing an office around, the plumbing, the electric.
Typically they don't attend our meetings, although.
How do you invite them?
They just call and get on our subscription list, and we'll send a notice out to them. And they can even give us agenda items. I always ask for at the meetings, I said, are there any agenda items you want discussed? We publish minutes, and we send the minutes out to all the participants. Even if they don't attend, we send out minutes to those that don't attend.
Attend what?
Attend these developer forum meetings where we discuss issues.
So the developer forum meetings is for more than just developers?
Yes. Yes. Architects, contractors, builders, whoever. And we're willing, and we have building safety on our agenda to talk about issues. They talk about the tenant improvement process, changes to that. So it's open for that.
And they don't come?
Typically, they don't come.
Have we tried to determine why?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe the word hasn't gotten out to them.
Well, there's some neighborhoods like Pebble Creek, and their architectural committee keeps a list of all contractors that come in. They have to be approved to come into the development. And so there's an invitation list there. If you're talking about the construction guy puts on a garage or an extra casita or something like that, are you thinking in that?
I'm largely, well, that's an issue too, but I'm largely thinking about a fellow who does small commercial jobs.
Okay. Okay.
And there's quite a few of those. I saw in one of your reports here that the number of 30 came up, that you had 30 TIs or permits in June, whatever month it was.
It's possible.
Which seemed like quite a bit to me. And so there's up to 30 people making changes in construction in Goodyear. And I just, they come to me and they never want me to say who they are. But I somehow or other, we need to really reach out and incorporate them in this type of process. They very well could have very fundamentally valuable ideas to achieve, I think, what you want to achieve, a more efficient, expedient, and expeditious process. And, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Could that be along with the business license information
No,
at that time?
a business license is different.
I know it's different, but I mean, getting the information out so they know it's available to attend. I think that's always the problem.
If we have a list, I believe we have a list of registered contractors in the city. If we can get that information, we have emails. We can send notices out to those individuals and alert them to meetings, upcoming meetings and agendas, and solicit their.
And tell them they're
could do that.
very, very welcome and encouraged to participate. And we seek their input, I think. Thanks.
Good evening. Harvey said I'm going to go over the fire building life safety section of the fire department. Fire building life safety was added into the fire department in 2008. Not sure why my slide's not advancing. There it is. Basically, we saw it as a great opportunity to be able to pair with their colleagues in fire prevention and also to increase the safety for the firefighters and work hand in hand with the fire department. Current staffing in that division is overseen by a deputy fire chief. In building safety, we have the chief building official. We have the plan review supervisor. We also have one plan reviewer. We have 4 building inspectors and also permit techs that we brought over in July and also in October, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And then on the fire prevention side, we have the fire marshal. We have fire plan reviewers, which are 2. One of those plan reviewers, Autumn Hartsoe, can also go over to building safety as well. She's certified on that side in building plan review as well as fire plan review. And then we also have fire inspectors. We have 2.5, the half FTE or the part-time employee is part of the Litchfield Park IGA, and mostly serves the Litchfield Park area at this point. Just wanted to take you through a little bit of what our work load is like right now for the last year. As you can see, we have the inspection units, which are in yellow, and then also the permits, which are in red. Now, they are all permits. Every month we report to city manager and the deputy city managers single-family permits, which are down significantly over the years, 30 for September. But in this report, we're showing all permits, which includes single-family, new building, tenant improvements, residential additions, and miscellaneous residentials. And basically, at this time, we are seeing a decrease, as you said, Mr. Mayor. The specific number I'm not really sure of at this point in time. In June, we wanted to look very closely at the process in which we take plans in and how we interact with our customers. So we put a team together. Mike Ullman, Ed Kulik, Bill King, Myra Russell, Lisa Nagel, and myself were part of that process improvement team. One of the biggest things we wanted to look at, and we knew that we get a lot of concern about, is the plan review and turnaround of such. So we actively monitor this on a monthly basis. We also went out and did some benchmarking, which we'll get into. But currently, as we stand right now, with our 2 plan reviewers, and bear in mind one is a supervisor overseeing other functions as well, we are doing 21.3 days for commercial turnaround on a 30-day stated time frame. Tenant improvements, we're right at the stated time, a little bit over. Residential standards, again, right at or a little bit over. And then the gas line, pools, spas, et cetera, we're about a couple days shy of the stated dates. Obviously, one of the things that we outlined in the COAC was the change in the process for occupant permit or change in occupant permitting. This was a concern that we heard from our customers out there, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed it and made it easier for them. The process is that any time a tenant changes out of a building, a new tenant comes in, we want to make sure that there is a change of occupancy. One, to keep us safe as customers going into that building. As firefighters going into that building, we want to make sure that they're safe. And then additionally, we want to make sure we have the right contact information in the event that there is an emergency in that building, that we can contact the right people. So the C of O was issued for a specific tenant for a specific purpose or use. At one point, we did have 3 permits that were required any time that there was a change of occupancy. And obviously, we knew that this was some distress for some of our customers. So we want to make sure that when we did change that process, we looked at that closely. So we brought all of the city work groups together to make sure that we were addressing this appropriately. We brought in building safety inspectors, fire prevention, and also the permit techs to make sure that we addressed everything that would fall into this process improvement. We wanted to make sure that we walked through the business owner as well. So Councilmember Osborne, you asked before if we had a specific person. We don't, but we have a very specific step-by-step process for them to follow so that they are aware of who they have to contact and in the event that they have any questions and who those contact people are. We also reduced the number of permits to 1. So we've combined those 2 fire permits and the building safety permit into 1 permit that comes out of our office. So far, it's been a win-win for all of our people that are coming in. Basically, the whole city process was highlighted for the tenant or for the owner that's going into that new building or new building to them. The other piece that we looked at that we really felt was important was the tracking of permit techs and over-the-counter TIs that other cities that we hear so much about do on a regular basis. First, we wanted to look at what is the amount of work that the permit techs that are doing that aren't assigned to fire building life safety. And this was pretty significant. And in our analysis in June, we found that 58% of all permits that were issued out of our office were by other permit techs. So our permit techs, 2 of them at that time in July, were incredibly busy, and we found that we still needed more help because we continue to be pretty steady in issuing permits through fire building life safety. Additionally, 42% of the customers that came through fire building life safety were also handled by other permit techs. So on October 11th, we made our pitch to the city manager, and we moved over 1 more permit tech from engineering to fire building life safety. So now through fire building life safety, we have 3 permit techs that are assigned there. While we still work collegially with our other partners in P&Z and also engineering, most of the work right now at this point is coming through fire building life safety. Basically, we're trying to increase our customer responsiveness to our customers that come in the door. We want to make sure that we're being very responsive to their needs and their requirements. And we're also hoping at some point that we'll reduce the amount of work that the plan reviewers are doing by doing some more over-the-counter TI and process improvements. That process improvement comes up. With the addition of that third tech, we hope to really improve that process over the counter for them and shorten that time so they can get their permits in a much more timely fashion, even sometimes over the counter in some cases, depending on the project size. We hope to get this plan in place by the end of February. Hopefully it will be out there sooner. And again, like I had said before, it takes a lot of work off the plan reviewers, so in turn it will actually reduce the turnaround times and other plans that they are reviewing. Another piece that we looked at that came from our customers, but also from the staff that were working, was some type of a project data card that could be assigned to each project. So now when somebody comes in to drop off a plan, once the permit tech is finished with them, they actually take something away with them. On this card, the person has their project number, has all the contact information. They have the person that they need to contact in the event that there is a question about the project. They have access in the web address for the click-to-gov, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen there, which allows them real-time access to their plans to see red line comments or anything else that may be of an issue that's popping up on that plan, so they can respond immediately if they have to. We've gotten good reviews back from our customers on this to date, and this has been very well received.
How long has this been in place?
Since July, sir, was when we put it in place.
Thank you.
I think this kind of goes back to what I was just speaking of with the flow chart. It sounds like maybe that's what
Yep.
that is helping with.
Yep.
Thank you.
Turnaround times, we realize that this is a very high level of concern for our customers, both internally and externally. Data from the last 6 months of actual turnaround times was examined. The ratio that was examined from other cities, we picked Gilbert and Peoria because they were actually doing the same amount of volume or close to the same amount of volume that we were during the time of the analysis. What we did find, which was interesting, was Gilbert and Peoria have one plan reviewer for every 23 plans that were reviewed, versus the city of Goodyear, which has one plan reviewer for every 33.5 plans that are reviewed. And here's our benchmarking here. As you can see, I brought all the cities that were doing the most volume closest to the top there so you could compare them easily. Pretty much everybody has a little bit less time frame from us for commercial turnaround. Tenant improvement, we're right at the benchmark, and for new residential, we're slightly below as well. For reviewers, they have 3 versus our 2. Now bear in mind that one of our plans reviewer is our supervisor as well, so he's overseeing the permit text, he's overseeing customer concerns as well as reviewing plans. These other cities don't include their supervisor in a plan reviewer, so they're actually outnumbering us by quite a bit in that standpoint. We hear the most complaints about our TI process, which was interestingly, and we meet that benchmark head-on with every other city. So it's the other processes that we're not really hearing too much concern of. We do hear it from some, but for the most part, when people want expedited plan reviews, we are making those happen. Yes, sir.
What's the difference between us and Avondale? The 67 versus 2?
They love us, I guess. That's the amount of single-family permits that were issued, the 67 versus 2. But
That's in 1 month.
yeah, yes, sir.
So in May, it could be entirely different, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So obviously, we had a concern about the amount of plans that were coming in, and the time frame that was taken to turn them around. One of our first steps was the permit text, obviously to help take some of the weight off the plan reviewers. The second part, as opposed to adding another FTE, would be to have a contract employee. Now, why this is something that we had in place before, this time when we went out with the contract, we wanted to make sure that it was good for the city of Goodyear, that we made sure that what the third-party reviewer was getting was, was in line with what today's standards are and today's work volume is. Obviously, their work is down as well, so we felt like we had a more competitive market out there to reach out to those other plan reviewers. So we've just closed the bids on the RFQ or the RFP. We've had some submittals in there, so we'll start reviewing those in the next week, and we'll be hopefully awarding those before the end of November. Again, in times where we have prolonged absence of a plan reviewer, or we have an expedited need, or we have an increased volume, we can call on this contractor without really having too much more of a demand on our current budget. So we feel like this is going to be really beneficial for the city as well as our customers. We also reached out to our contractors. We went out and physically hand-delivered invites to our contractor meeting, had them meet and greet the chief building official, the deputy fire chief, myself, all the permit techs, as well as the plan reviewers and the inspectors. We invited them to this forum. We had 20 people show up. It was a great showing. We hope to hold this probably twice a year, at least for right now. But we went over all of our processes, what we're hoping to change, some of the things that are staying the same, our expectations, their expectations of us, and we had a very good feedback from that meeting. It was given a 4.5 out of a 5 rating from our customers externally. And as Harvey talked about, we also have pre-application meetings. He kind of hit most of the highlights, and I just want to kind of go over that with you a little bit. Allows the project managers to come in before any submittals and talk to our fire building life safety team. They're also able to see them. They're not talking to them over the phone, not sending them an email. They are seeing that this is Ed Kulik, the chief building official. This is Maria Herridge, our fire marshal. They're able to see those people. They get their business cards before they leave. They know their contact numbers. But it also allows us to, very early in the process, identify any potential scheduling or conflicts that may come up in those types of a process. But sometimes they're more project-specific issues as opposed to conflicts. So we want to make sure that we identify those very early in the process. And the developers are very happy with this meeting review. And then that's it. Questions or comments? Concerns?
I just wanted to leave it on a high note that I have received compliments on this plan review meetings, that everybody's in the room with the developer or the customer, and they've been very pleased with that. So congratulations, and also the fact that you are you've heard the concerns, you've heard the comments, and you know what, you're doing something about it, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Just echoing, I appreciate the input that you're getting from the public as part of the process. Thank you.
Sure.
I think 4.5 out of 5, it means you're doing a good job.
Doing something right.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything I just heard, but we'll move on.
Fair enough.
Page 20 of the Goodyear Fire Department, fire building and life safety section. It's about that, Paul, it's about the change of occupancy permitting.
Yes, sir.
And a certificate of occupancy is issued if you don't necessarily change the use, but you change the owner, or you change the name.
Correct.
Now, and you explained why in your briefing and in the writing here. And it says the associated fees for a change of occupancy is $260. Now, that isn't true, is it, if you just change the name?
I believe it is. If with all of the process, I believe that is the fee for a change of occupancy permit. Yep.
You wouldn't have a fire inspection fee. It would be over the counter. That I haven't changed anything. I just changed the name.
They'll have an inspector go out to ensure that nothing has changed. Even though a customer does come in to our establishment and says that they're just changing the name, sometimes they have changed other things. So we have to make sure that nothing else has changed. So we'll require an inspection. And I know sometimes that is a bone of contention with some of our customers. However, the biggest concern for us is that they haven't changed that to affect a sprinkler flow or to construct a new office that doesn't meet code. So
If they say they didn't, that doesn't make any difference. You're going to come out anyway.
we used to go out, yeah.
So what do you do over the counters on? Do you do any over the counters?
For not really for C of Os, but we will do pools, fences, gas lines, those types of things for over-the-counter reviews.
So you trust the person?
Well, they have to come in with the drawings, and obviously we're trying to help them along in the process. But that's just to get the project started. At one point, they will have to get a final inspection done. Yeah, that's for the permit to begin work on the project.
Yeah, you know, it just seems to me that, and I remember Ken Porter was very, very eloquently said this, that we shouldn't be charging a permit or a license or anything unless the amount of the cost to satisfy the need for the license or to inspect for the permit or whatever equals that particular number. So in other words, we charge, but we assume a cost that's commensurate with that cost, right? That fee. But that isn't true here on a change of occupancy permit. There's no reason for us to be spending $260 because a person changed the name of that particular unit.
Am I misunderstanding this? You're still saying you go out to the building.
That's
you
correct.
inspect it. Because
Yeah.
I can remember when I was in the home building business, sometimes we gave temporary occupancy permits, and we took the customer's word, and you can't imagine the things were going on.
Yeah.
And so I know our builder, my developer, became very strict on this. And so I can understand your concern.
Yeah.
I can't. You know, there is some sort of trust here that we all assume in our lives, and to have a Goodyear small business person who changes the name of their business, and I don't have any example, and to do that, we're going to charge them $260, just seems to me absurd.
But say they made some change in there that could cause a later fire, could cause some kind of catastrophe, and so now as a city, we say, well, we didn't do that because we want to make sure we tell our people we trust them. And we do trust them, but I think you have to follow up on that. We're a business, and I think we have to protect ourselves. And this is part of doing business when you open a business.
No, but we don't trust them, is the point. That's why we go out. But we should trust them a little bit. I think a change of name, and if they come into your office and say, I've done nothing, change it, I find it disturbing that we have to go out and verify that they're telling the truth.
And sir, there are
You betcha.
there are times when they've said they've changed nothing, and they go in and they
But
put
is
a
that
new wall
is that
up and-
very often, or,
It happens more than you'd like to think, unfortunately.
well, not very often, probably.
Okay.
All right. I just
I'm
would
curious
have
about your
would have a trouble defending this with a citizen of Goodyear doing business. So, but anyway, any other questions?
My question is that you said there was more that you didn't, that we complimented and on this, and you said, no, you didn't think it was. I'm curious, since this is what we're up here for on a work session, what is it do you think that's not in there that needs to be or needs to be improved?
I think, and I've talked to Mark and I've talked to Paul, and I think they are making improvement. But I know there's just too many people out there who are still disturbed about the time it takes to get inspections done and the difficulty in getting a person to respond. I get that all the time. So I'm not going to question 4 out of 5 of those people who attended. But my concern is that there's a lot of people in Goodyear who probably don't attend. And maybe we shouldn't be defending them, but I probably am, because they're trying to do a job and make a few dollars and make Goodyear a better place to be, but they simply don't know, or it isn't in their particular background to do these sorts of things with you. So I really wouldn't find a lot of comfort in the 4.5 out of 5, or the fact that things are getting better. I think things are getting better, but I'm not comforted by that. I think we need to move forward still more. And I would like to get to the point where 90% of the people who do work in Goodyear are really satisfied with our permitting and inspection processes. And that isn't true today, in my opinion.
Well, is that something then that you would like, I mean, it sounds like these items have just recently been put into place, and I agree with you. I've seen a roller coaster of complaints and positive things that have come over the last 9 years. And I think they've all realized that we're hearing more complaints lately than positive things. And I mean within the last, say, year's time. And they're doing their best to try to fix that, but these things have only gone into place since July, more or less.
Yeah,
And
more or
so let's give it, I'd like to hear back some results of these changes and actual, the surveys. I know that you're not happy with the so far surveys that have come out, but we need to hear. I don't know that 2.5 months is going to give us a clear view of what's been a positive step forward for the customer, and I think we need another 4 months to really hear that.
I certainly don't disagree with that.
It would be nice, though, for the customer to make the complaint known, to come forth, to register the complaint, because it's just really hard if, so many times people come up to us after church, while you're shopping with a casual remark. But that casual remark needs to be taken to the city, and it needs to be registered, and we need to find those things out. So I appeal to the public to start being vocal about this. We don't need a silent majority out there. We need them out. We need them noisy, coming and talking to us about it.
And I'll certainly meet with any customer that would like to. I love meeting new people, so.
Was there any response from the 20 people that attended your meeting relative to this issue?
I mean, everybody responded from that meeting that day. They left the surveys before they left, and everybody was very happy with it. So we had positive feedback from the meeting. We also had some negative concerns. Scheduling of inspections. One of the biggest things we said is consider us as a subcontractor to you. We showed them how the scheduling process works. It's electronic. They call up, and we said schedule us out, and throughout the whole entire project, and we'll be there when you need us. So, we have a lot of cancels on our inspections, but we still complete a lot of inspections. Obviously, as you can see from those numbers that I showed earlier, those numbers are quite a bit. I mean, each one of those units equals 10 minutes for an inspection. So those are quite a bit of inspections that those four are doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. So.
I did go along with Jesus,
Yes.
and by the way, I found him very professional, and the people that he visited with appreciated that professionalism and the fact that he demonstrated a concern for their time as money lifestyle.
And that's what we push with all of our employees, responsiveness to the customer.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
We'll move right into the,
Really?
what?
Can I take
Oh, okay. Well, why don't we take
2 minutes?
how about, when it gets to 22, how about that? And I'll adjourn the work session.